Congratulations. All right, so today we're going to talk about last minute tips to improve year-end planned and major giving campaigns, and really excited about this. One thing to note, and many of you will know this, we have put some more work in to make sure that this is CFRE approved. So if you're working towards your professional certification or recertification in this case, for many of you, this is worth 1.0 CFRE credits. Special shout out to my colleague Simone, who works all the time to make this happen. We know that a lot of you don't have the professional development budgets you might have had 2 years ago. Really, really important. So agenda for today, I won't read it out, but here it is. Big thing to note is that the recording and the slides will be sent around later today. So if you want to furiously take notes, you should feel free. But if you all just want to sit back and eat your lunch or do whatever, feel free to do that as well. One other note, by the way, that because so many of us are going through end of year fundraising at the same time, if you have ideas along the way or if you have extra thoughts, just make sure to enter them in the chat as we go. I think a lot of people can benefit from the additional context and the additional expertise of so many people here. All right, quick intros. So I know many of you. My name is Patrick. I'm lucky to be the co-founder and co-CEO of FreeWill, alongside my wonderful co-founder, Jenny, pictured here. We're super lucky to work alongside now a team that is more than 110 people, raised more than $4 billion in a whole bunch of really cool types of giving. So super excited about that. And then one thing I wanted to share, which is the thing that's bringing me the most joy in the last week, is that this weekend in Austin, got to go to the wedding of Virginia. So many of you have worked with Virginia, obviously in white here. And Virginia's our first employee. And the wedding was actually officiated by Megan, who's immediately to Virginia's left here, who was our second employee. And so it was really special to, they met at FreeWill, super excited. And Virginia's husband, Will, is amazing. So we're all super thrilled. This is, by the way, the first time I've worn a suit in 1.5 years. And you can tell because if you look down towards my shoes, you can see that pant leg is accidentally tucked into my socks because we're all sort of reintegrating into the world pretty slowly. So super excited. If you know Virginia, shoot her a note. She'll be back at work soon, but then she's going on a longer honeymoon later. So we didn't make her rush back to work. All right, other thing is that as we look at end of year, it is increasingly frenzied for a lot of you. And that is professionally, right? That's setting aside the going to see the grandparents for the first time in forever, reconnecting with family for the first time forever, navigating travel in a not yet post-pandemic world. And so one thing we wanted to do is send this book, which is called Wherever You Go, There You Are, which is actually a book on mindfulness that is incredibly highly rated by Jon Kabat-Zinn. And so what we'll do is we'll give it to 20 folks on the call. Just make a note in the survey at the end if you'd like to send you a copy, tell us where to send it. And then I think the broader message here is that we're just thinking about you as you go into end of year. We know that there's so much going on, and that mental health and de-stressing is really, really important. So hopefully this gets to you. Okay, let's talk about how your week is going. We measure this over time. We did from the beginning of the pandemic all the way to present moment. You can see that top blue graph is happiness, still the dominant emotion across the nonprofit landscape, and yet down a bit from last week. Anxiety, pretty even eagerness is going up, which is a cool thing to see. Also nice to see loneliness hitting all the way down. So cool. Jamila asks, can copies be sent over to the UK of books? Yes, just feel free to enter your name in the survey and we'll go from there. We also asked about confidence levels about hitting your goals this year. And so what you can see here is that they're back up a little bit under 3.9, so not quite at peak, but this is the average out of 5 in terms of how confident people are feeling about hitting their goals this year. And we hope that this is a little bit helpful to inch that up a little bit more so that you have a better chance hitting your goals this calendar year by being here. We asked how you are feeling right now. What are the dominant emotions around end of year giving? And what you see is hopeful and excited are 1 and 2. And then anxious is number 3. So there's a lot going on. Stressed, optimistic, eager, curious, worried, grateful, bored, challenged, prepared, concerned. All these things are happening at the same time. So you can probably see yourself in some of these words. I can certainly see myself in some of them. And just know that it seems like a pretty common emotion, that you are not alone here. So what's actually happening in the world that will affect end of year giving? And then we'll talk about what it means for end of year giving and how to make the most of it. By the way, I had 2 weddings this weekend. So first one was Virginia. Second one was a really wonderful Orthodox Jewish wedding in New Jersey. I was really glad to be part of that tradition. But if you hear My voice being not quite what it might be normally, the effect of 2 weddings in 20 hours, including 2,000 miles of travel in there, probably had some effect here. So what is the first big trend? Well, those of you that will see this, the stock market goes up and down every day. The stock market is massively up over the last few years. And so this is a graph of what it looks like. Rising stock market returns is oftentimes the #1 indicator of charitable giving. So this is a very, very positive sign overall. You can see that not only are things dramatically up from that giant dip in early 2020, they're also up since before the pandemic, since 2019, since 2018, since 2017. In fact, you look at this, before 2017, we're up almost 150% in the last 4 years. And most of your donors, right? Most of your wealthy donors, your major donors are older. Most of those folks will be holding investments, not just from 2017, but from 2010, 2008. And so there's a ton of wealth happening here. What does that mean? So the S&P 500 is up 68% from that back 2/3 of 2020, right? And then it's grown another 21% this year, which means it's more than doubled since the pandemic drop in 2020. And now, no promises here, but November and December are typically the strongest months of the year for market performance. Okay, so what we are likely to see, or potentially we'll see a continued increase absent some major cataclysmic event. So what does it mean? It has really big implications for donations. So obviously, some people will be giving stock, but your major donors, the folks who are wealthy, are typically heavily invested in public markets, whether it's single stocks or mutual fund or retirement accounts, right? These are people who aren't just giving because they have a very high salary. They tend to have a very high net worth. That net worth tends to be in these types of assets, and that grows or shrinks based on overall market performance. People who are relying on assets over income for wealth are faring much better right now, and that was also true last year. So the stock market gains also have a really big impact on retirement accounts, which we often forget about. So retirement accounts tend to almost always purchase mutual funds, things that track the S&P or the NASDAQ, more so than individual stocks. And in 2020, there was already more than $10 trillion in IRAs, which again means there's probably about $13 trillion now in IRAs. Over $9 trillion of that is in what are called traditional IRAs, which are the best IRAs for tax-savvy giving. So all of these different vehicles that we talk about, most of them have a lot of public equities in them. And so they're all growing at the same time: stocks giving, retirement giving, DAF giving, which we'll talk about in a little bit. These are all sharply on their way up. And that is a very, very good thing if we can take advantage of it. So 3 big factors here will result in a lot bigger gifts from retirement accounts. And particularly, we're talking about IRAs here. So the strong stock market means, these accounts might be 20% larger than they were last year. Also, if IRA owners didn't take an RMD last year, which for a bunch of reasons was eliminated only for 1 year, their IRA will have more money in it, and they will have a larger RMD this year. RMD is the money that the government says you have to take out of your account. And since no one had RMDs last year, you're going to have twice as many new people taking distributions out of their retirement account for the very first time. So there's going to be a really big surge in retirement account giving at end of year. We're already seeing it. Just to give you an example, September QCD giving was up about 9 times over last September's QCD giving, right? So we're not even at November, December yet. And it is a massive increase over last year. And last year was actually an increase over the year before. Not a huge one, but 20% or so. Plus, what else is happening? Being a major donor fundraiser, being a plan giving fundraiser, is sort of moonlighting as a demographer. It is super important to understand that 10,000 people are turning 75, turning 72 every day. And so this is the group that makes up 41% of all donations. It is 55% of all high net worth donors, right? So most of your major giving category falls into this one. And 10,000 folks are turning 72 every day. So they're becoming newly eligible for retirement giving. They're also, we move down the road. These are going to be massive plan giving donors. Super, super, super important. Other big thing that's happening, online donations have grown by 21% last year. This is a new record. In fact, 13% of all funds came from online donations. 30% of those were made through a mobile device. And it's not because nonprofits are sending more emails or appeals. Donor communications only went up by 1%. right? So we're not doing more. We're just having more results for the same amount of work. Super, super, super important. It also means the folks that are moving major and plan giving online are doing far better. And I'll show you this really fascinating graph in a moment. But donors are getting used to everything being easier. And so they have the same expectations now of our own work. Let's just look at this. So it's not just younger generations that are giving online. That's commonly assumed. In fact, the 65 plus population grew by over a third during the last decade to 52 million people, right? These are the biggest set of donors, by far the most money given. They're using technology now at a rate that was previously predicted for 2030. So there was a question about, hey, does this have to do with the post office? It actually has much more to do with new online adoption of things from like mortgages and medical stuff and all these other things that you would have thought someone 60 is not going to do this online. All of it's moving online extremely quickly. It means that for the first time this year compared to any previous year, the largest gifts are going to frequently be from online donations, even among older donors. So this is a really, really big switch. Take a look at this. So let's start all the way at the right here. All right, so we're looking at the silent generation. Silent generation born 1945 or earlier, which makes them turning 77 next year. Okay, I'll give you a second all of this graph to take it in. That turquoise line is 43%. So they 43% give by mail. 38% of people are giving online through the website. This is the people over 76, right? 76 to 106. So mail is barely edging out online donations among people who are over 76, right? This is only those folks. 6% of people over 76 give via social media, 3% give via text. So actually, if you add up text, social media, and online, it outperforms mail. Also really nice because many of these things are way cheaper than direct mail. And so you're really seeing more nonprofits shift away from direct mail in that. Daryl asks if we can share the slide. Daryl, this will come with all the slides after the fact. Now let's move a little bit to the left down to baby boomers. So you can see baby boomers outperforming on online over mail by a pretty significant degree. So we're looking at about a quarter of baby boomers giving by mail and a third giving by social media. And then you layer social media and SMS on top of that, and we're looking at half, right? And obviously a lot of people are not donors at all. So those folks aren't included here. Super, super informal. Now we move to Gen X. So Gen X, pre-millennial, whenever we do some of these, people always complain we don't talk enough about Gen X. 15-year generation, 37% of them do online, and then mail is just, we're looking at 1 in 7, 1 in 8 people giving mail here. Millennials, not much lower on mail, much higher on social media, much higher online. But look at this, 40% of millennials give online, 38% of silent generation gives online, right? So you have more people giving on mail from silence, but you have more non-donors as you move down to demographics because there's just less money around. But 40%, millennials, Gen X, boomers, silent, they all look sort of similar from an online giving standpoint, which might be surprising to some people. And then Gen Z, big thing about Gen Z is they're standouts on social media, right? So the good news is you can get Gen Z donors on social media. The bad news is they don't have any money. So it's not really going to be a big part of your work to hit goals. Evelina says the slide is making her feel old. Same here. Whenever we did sort of a demographic breakdown of FreeWill employees, and an unhealthy amount of them were Gen Z the other day, and it made us all feel really old. All right, so now that you know what's happening in the world, let's talk about some last minute improvements that you want to make. First thing is really, really think about what kind of giving types we'll focus on most in November, December, right? So we just talked about the stock market. Really important, most people didn't get 20% raises this year, but their assets grew by 20%. So we're going to really think about how do we do this, right? So when we asked you what you'll focus on, 71% says cash, 56% says major gifts, 50%, which is a really good sign, but this should be going farther up, say qualified charitable distributions. These are super, super important if you have any donors over 70, and you do. Stock, 44%. Again, this is much higher than it would have been a year ago. So there's a ton of progress in the community here. This should be 88%. Donor advised funds, 38%, planned gifts, 31%. A lot of people really smart about planned gifts. Don't do as much of it end of year. We'll talk about one cool tip you might want to do around planned giving here. And so that's basically the breakdown. Now, when we ask, how confident are you? How good is your team? How comfortable are you here? 1 to 5. So you can see cash gifts, super high level of confidence. Interestingly, bequests, way higher than anything else. Donor advised funds, now there's only a third of folks, maybe less than a third, saying I'm a 5. Only about 20% say I'm a 4. Qualified charitable distributions, again, not a ton of people super confident. Gift annuities, a lot of organizations are focused on that. And then stock gifts, a big mix too, right? So I will just, for those of you that are in leadership positions, we look heavily at a lot of data around what different nonprofits are doing. There is a almost perfect correlation. I shouldn't say that. There's that strong correlation between how well trained your team is on non-cash assets, how well they do with those non-cash assets, and then how well people do with non-cash assets is extremely highly correlated to overall fundraising success. So it is almost impossible. We don't get paid for any training, so I'm going to say that before I say the next thing. It is almost impossible for you to spend too much money on training your team around non-cash assets. It's probably the most important thing you can do for overall growth. All right, so tip 1 here, big thing, do not let your non-cash donors regress back into giving cash. So if you should have a very, very clear idea of who gave you stock or DAFs or QCDs or real estate before, and make sure you're asking for those gifts before cash. If you ask for cash, the worst thing that might happen is you'll get it, and you end up with a much, much smaller gift from exactly the same person. Instead, go through all the donors who've ever given you non-cash, ask for these types again, right? So this is a really important thing that you're doing some list making right now and thinking about, okay, how do we communicate with these people about these types of gifts? Just to hammer this home, the average gift size of a cash gift is $100. The average gift size of an IRA gift through our tools, and that's the data we have access to, $4,600. The average stock gift is about $10,000, right? So that stock gift is 100 times larger than a cash gift. Please make sure you're asking folks for the larger types of gifts. The single fastest way to increase giving from a single person is to change the way they give, right? Change the giving type, and that will be the most dramatic results. So it's especially important for stock donors because these donors are likely to have a lot of wealth and investments. They're going to have a lot of capital gains taxes this year because of all that growth. And so this is really important, right? There's a big push across the country right now among American nonprofits. The folks who are calling in from the UK, the capital gains tax are going to be a little bit different over there. And we're not going to get to that, but if you want to email me, we can talk about it separately. But what we're seeing in the US, because the stock market is surging and because people are increasingly seeing the value of stock gifts, is there's this big push on Monday, the 29th, the day before Giving Tuesday, called Stock Monday. And the goal is to prime donors to make a stock gift on Giving Tuesday or in any of their year-end giving. Tons of people are reaching out on this day to share the value of giving stock instead of cash, and it should result in much, much larger gifts from the same people. So this is really exciting. There's a full email template that I'm going to share with you. This is what that email looks like. I won't read it all here, but we'll send it to you after the fact if you want to take a second to read it. Really, really exciting. And the more that we can educate donors, the better off we'll be, and the gifts will be much larger. One caveat here, many nonprofit fundraisers tend to dramatically overestimate the financial sophistication of their donors, right? Most people that are wealthy are not wealthy because they're experts on giving types. It's because they're really good at something, or they inherited wealth, or a bunch of other reasons. But it's not. But when we talk to donors, they are rarely experts here, and so a little extra nudge from you is going to go a really, really long way. Suzanne says we're currently prepping for our first Stock Monday. That is awesome. Great news, Suzanne. Okay, so let's think about this for a second. Really important. If donor is given stock again, make a plan to ask them for stock, right? Excuse me. They've given stock, make a plan to ask them again. For donors who have given QCDs, make a plan to ask them for QCDs. We'll talk more about this in a moment. Now, for donors who have given donor advised funds, this is going to be a little different. For donors who have given donor advised funds, ask for donor advised funds and ask for stock. Now, why is this? Why is this true? Well, 65% of what goes into DAFs are non-cash assets, mostly stock. you want to ask for this before it goes into the donor advised fund. Now, why does it go to the donor advised fund and not to you? In some cases, people are just trying to get it out of their hands before end of year taxes. But part of the reason is that Fidelity and Schwab and Vanguard, which are the donor advised funds that are growing, community foundations are actually shrinking in terms of DAFs. They are making it so easy to transfer stock into donor advised funds. And they remind people all the time that you can do this, right? So it's not magic. It's these two things, making it easy and reminding people. And it's really important to understand that the DAF donors are frequently folks that have appreciated assets and are looking to transfer them, but you haven't asked them to transfer them to you. So they go into the DAF, and maybe you'll get some of that at some point, but it's not going to happen immediately. It's not going to help you this year. It's really important to focus on that as well. Now, sure, you can ask for DAF gifts as well, but I did want to drive that point home, which is often overlooked. So let's talk about qualified charitable distributions. These continue to be the fastest growing type of philanthropy. They grew 3 times since 2017. As we saw earlier, there's so much money in retirement accounts, but only 5% of eligible donors are giving these right now. So what are we going to do about it? For many seniors, we should understand that QCDs will be the single best way to give. Donors over 70.5 can give $100,000 tax-free every year from a traditional IRA. And if they're over 72, the government says you have to take some money out. And so this is a really good avenue. That money is going to be taxed at a relatively high income tax rate, especially, by the way, if they live in one of the higher tax states. And so a QCD here will allow them to meet that required minimum distribution and save a ton of money on taxes. So this is really exciting. You really want to help these folks, by the way, preserve their post-tax cash by doing this instead. So it's a really kind thing to do for your donors. Remember, there will be twice as many new folks taking RMDs this year. There will be so many folks looking to give these or looking to learn about them because they're new, right? It's rare that you age into a type of giving. So we have a really important role here to talk about, suggest that people make these and talk about how to do it. This is a really important thing for one-on-one conversations, in emails, in direct appeals to older donors. You also want to add it to your donation pages. Again, if you're only asking for cash, you'll get cash. Now, it's great to have a $100 gift. It's a little sad to have a $100 gift that could have been $5,000 if we changed the way that someone came. So here's an example of what the language you might want to use. This year, we're seeing so many people give from their IRA instead of giving cash. These gifts are so popular because the money in your IRA went in pre-tax. It will be taxed almost any way it comes out when you take a distribution, even if you pass away in 30 years. Your heirs will still have to pay pretty high taxes on the IRA, even if you're under the estate tax threshold. Donating directly to your IRA, from your IRA avoids any taxes and allows you to preserve the post-tax money that you already have. So really, we'll have a session in January or early February and actually do a look back on what were the big trends and what happened in end of year giving. But we expect that this is one of the things that will just be off the charts. Stock giving, way, way higher than previous years. We expect QCDs to be off the charts, maybe even doubling from last year, at least growing by about 50%. So keep an eye on that. And as these gifts start to come in, we'd love any anecdotal information you're seeing. That'll be really useful. Simone, by the way, just pasted in the chat. We did a whole QCD report that she led on and did a really wonderful job. So if you want to go way, way deeper on this, that's a really good document to do so. Okay. Third point, matching gifts are super important. We forget about matching gifts sometimes on the biggest gifts, which is a really big mistake, right? So it's great that, I work at GM, I give $50, GM matches it, awesome. But we forget sometimes that donor advised fund gifts, stock gifts can also get matched. And if I'm now an executive at GM giving $8,000, well, I think GM matches up to $10,000. So making sure that you're asking your major donors who are still working whether their employers match these gifts. And oftentimes that will be a free $10,000 for you. So this is a really important point. Sometimes what happens is the matching process is only on the annual giving teams and the major giving teams don't recognize it. So it's really, really valuable. Even a $100,000 gift, maybe 10 or 15,000 of that can get matched at a lot of places. That's a really nice bonus. When you're prepping for a donor conversation, ask to see if their employer offers matching gifts. Sometimes you can even just Google, GM matching gifts, Microsoft matching gifts, if they work at a larger organization. It's a very easy way to raise funds. It will also often compel the donor to at least reach that level. So someone's going to give 5, but they could give 10. Say, well, your employer is going to match up to 10, so that additional 5,000, is worth an extra 5,000 to 10,000 total. The other thing is, once you actually start working in taxes, that extra 5,000 might cost them like $2,000 to give. $2,000 unlocking $10,000 in total giving. Tip 4, this is really important. It's fascinating from a psychological standpoint. A study by the Institute of Sustainable Philanthropy tested sending donors a thank you letter, and another group nothing after a gift. Donors who received a thank you gave 60% more in following donations than those who do not. If you're not already aggressively thanking people, you should really start doing it in the next few weeks before we get to Giving Tuesday. So when reaching out to donors, thank them, lead with impact. You should be doing this now. By the way, some people are not donors and we're moving them into donating, right? So what would you do right now? You might send more a mass appeal to them and just say, listen, thank you for being on this list, for paying attention to the issues, for being someone who cares about this. Really appreciate it. And thank you for all your attention this year. Nothing else, right? They haven't donated, they may not have volunteered. If they made a previous gift, you can obviously thank them. If they volunteered, go thank them for volunteering right now before we get to end of year giving season, and you will see significantly better results from those appeals. Anything else they've had an impact on, right? Even if it's thank you again for being a student, right? Thank you again for being part of this community. If you're have alumni, right? Thank you for being someone who visited the museum this year. Even if they never donated, aggressively thanking people never goes poorly, and it's going to result in significantly better outcomes. All right. One thing we really love is this thinking of you note. So this is something that should be short and clean and out of the blue, right? So they're not expecting it. It is not an immediate thank you to a gift, right? It is just, I gave in July, now I'm getting this from a gift officer. You also want to send a thank you note right after, but this should feel very spontaneous. Tori, I was handing out meals today at the food bank, and a new mother stopped to tell me how grateful she was for everything we do, as the rising cost of groceries and rent has made it harder to feed her family. I know that the gift you made us earlier, that you gave us earlier this year, made a big difference in our community, but I wanted to thank you again. Your support provided over 2,000 families meals like this mother's. If you have time next week, I'd love to catch up and hear about your holiday plans. How does Tuesday sound, right? And so this leading with a thank you, in another world, you don't even have to have this last paragraph. You can just sign off. And then when you follow up 2 weeks later, this will be in the donor's mind. And they're much more primed for giving. This is a really good avenue. All right, last one. This is important, and I'm surprised how often it doesn't happen, but it's really, really critical. When you get a moment today, probably today, go make a $3 gift to your own organization and pay attention to every step in the process. A consistent mistake that many nonprofits make, but not the smartest ones, is what they call a post-giving dead end. This means, by the way, that I give and it says thank you, and that's it. We're just done, right? So I'm newly inspired. I care about your organization right now more than ever because I've gotten over this huge hurdle. And then there's just a screen that says thank you, and we'll be in touch. Donors are at their most engaged and generous in this moment. Give them more to do. You want to pay particular attention to the landing pages, what a donor lands on after donating. Many smart nonprofits use this to suggest volunteer options, plan gifts, other ways to get involved. We know of one national organization that I think did about $5 to $10 million in bequests last year in December without asking once for planned giving gifts. And so what do? At the end of the flow, they said, thank you so much. If you're looking for other ways to get involved, click here to make an estate plan and potentially include us in your will. And suddenly they got another $10 million in bequests after having all these cash donations. So it's a really interesting dynamic. The other thing we do is you might want to use this moment to learn more about the donor, understand why they're inspired, understand what other giving types they might want to learn about, and this will turn them into major donors. Then you start January with this fresh list of people. You can call them and say, Sarah, thank you so much for your donation. I heard that you're really invested in particularly pediatric cancer research. Can I talk to you about some of the other things we're doing and whether there are some other ways you might want to get involved, right? And then you have this really strong list of folks who just told you what they're most passionate about. And potentially they said, and I saw that you wanted to learn more about giving from DAFs, or you wanted to learn more about stock giving because that's never something you've done before. Can I tell you what a stock gift might do for some of the pediatric cancer work, right? And so now you have this really strong relationship just because you didn't, give them a brick wall at the end, super, super, super important. There is basically no cost to doing this. So when we think about this, you can ask things like, what are you most excited about for the upcoming year? What do you want to have a greater impact on? Do you want to learn more about something in our organization, including different ways to give? You can just use Google surveys. This is not hard, right? I mean, you can make these in 4 minutes. You can add it to the receipt. You can add it to a thank you page. It doesn't have to be super fancy. It's okay if it's not in the right exactly the right shade of blue that your college is. This will be a treasure trove of information. Super, super, super important. So please take a minute to consider this. You will be grateful, potentially because you've got a lot more planned gifts, but also grateful because you're now starting January off with a bang and you have a really strong list of folks that you might want to follow up with. All right, so those are a bunch of our ideas. I want to share a couple other things that folks are doing from around this community, and then we'll get to some questions. So we asked, do you have any creative end of year fundraising plans? A couple that we liked. A lot of folks are doing small group meetings outdoors at the organization to connect with new members. Depending on your geographic location, this gets easier or harder in November, December. One organization says we're trying our first cross-platform marketing campaign for end-of-year giving, focused on charitable gift annuities. We've got a postcard mailing out at the end of October, magazine, CGA, Facebook ad, et cetera. So we're seeing a lot of this, by the way, in planned and major giving, that now you're starting to do emails and Facebook ads and something else, maybe a postcard as well. Can't just do mail anymore. Third one, we've begun the launch of something called home teams, where we create a group of givers who accomplish a major project together as part of a pooled group. That is really, really cool. Another organization, we're strategizing some video content to use for the week between Christmas and New Year's. Thinking about what might entice someone to open and watch a daily video over 4 to 5 days, like some sort of countdown. So this could be really cool. Other things, we do a month-long fundraising campaign that kicks off on Giving Tuesday. This includes a virtual event with our staff, external speakers, talking about the climate movement. And then also we have a whole bunch of other ways for donors to get involved the whole month, right? So this level of involvement beyond just giving, super, super important, and does a lot more for your giving. All right, and lastly, as a new nonprofit, we're thinking about mini holiday dinners with board members and their friends with the specific goal of funding an operating reserve future fund, right? So very tactical, small group of people making the hard ask, and exciting that this nonprofit is getting off the ground. Okay, so that was a lot in not that long a time. A couple of resources. One, remember this book. So much going on. Let's make sure we're taking moments for ourselves. We are, and by we, I mean my colleague Simone is pasting a link in the chat right now, I believe. Thank you, Simone. So that's in the chat right now. If you can fill out this survey, that will help us send you a copy. Other things, we have the Stock Monday email template that we promised we would send you, and a Giving Tuesday toolkit. So just make a small note in the survey and we'll send those your way. They can be really helpful to you or to other folks in your organization. And then one more thing that we're excited about actually tomorrow, which is going to mean a lot of tea and honey between now and then, is we're doing another session, another webinar, really focused on fundraising and planned giving in California. Now, why are we doing this? There's something called revocable living trusts, which are different than wills. They are especially important in California for a whole bunch of reasons. So if you are a California nonprofit, or if you just have tons of California donors, make a note in the survey and come join that. It will be at 11 Pacific, 2 Eastern. It's probably not going to take more than half an hour. And so it'll be really interesting if you want to drop by. You can also be tired of me, and that's totally understandable. A couple other things, big group demo on Thursday with Alyssa and Cassie, who are awesome. They're going to walk through a bunch of tools around some of these giving out of retirement accounts, some of this planned giving, and some of stock giving. They're really great, and that will be at 1 o'clock. So feel free to just come hang out on that if you'd like. And then if you do want a one-to-one demo of some of the FreeWill tools around stock giving or around QCDs, which is retirement giving, or bequests, just let us know and we'll reach out and we'll set you up with one of these amazing people. Okay, 60-second break. I am going to go through some of the Q&A. If you don't mind using this time to take the survey, I will be deeply indebted, and then we'll dive in here. So I will read these. If you take that survey, We'll be back in 30 seconds. Good questions. Do we have any tips about texting donors to give? So Erica, great question. Texting donors, let me actually just, before we get into all the Q&A, one more thing so that anyone can go whenever they feel like it. Next webinar is in 2 weeks, I guess. And we're gonna start looking ahead to what are the trends shaping planned giving then, including what is a bunch of the legislation in the recent House bills that may pass. What would that do, right? So we're gonna draw some implications of changes in capital gains, changes in QSBS, changes in estate taxes, all that, and then what we should be prepared for, because this is gonna be really important. And like a lot of stuff, tax giving is not built around charitable giving, but it tends to have massive impacts in the way that people give, right? People don't give because they're saving on taxes, but they change how they give because of it, and it's gonna have a lot of really big impact. So we're gonna have to get smart about a bunch of things really quickly to be ready for 2022 if all this stuff passes. So join us then. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen and we'll just go through a bunch of questions. So Erica asks, tips about texting donors to give. There are two categories here. So the first one is these like mass emails that say, okay, earthquake in Haiti, text $12 right now, right? And those are useful, right? They're really helpful. There's some money there. They also identify potential donors. They tend to rarely be major gifts, right? It's just people aren't texting, $3,000 gifts. The other thing that is underutilized is that you as a planned giving officer, as a major giving officer, or as the leader of one of these teams should be texting with some of your key prospects more regularly. Anyone with whom you would have a phone call, you should feel permission to text. Your open rates are gonna be 100%. The responsiveness will be much higher. And it's just like email, right? Especially, by the way, as you work down those generations, younger boomers, Gen X, millennials, they sort of want no part of your unsolicited phone calls. And a text that just says, hey, it's Mary over at the food bank. Here's a quick picture of everything that's happening today. Remember you gave back in September? Just wanted to say thank you, right? That sort of, the thinking of can be transposed into text and can be super, super valuable, and it's underutilized. Small tip that we've talked about previously in other sessions. If you don't want to use your personal phone, Google Voice can set you up with a number. You can text from it. You can do it from your computer. It's pretty easy. And I think it's free, but you can check that out. So keep texting your donors, which is basically the key message here. Thanks, Chet. Chet says Google Voice is the best. How many of those who give online do so because they received an ask in snail mail? Jane, it's hard to know. We don't have great data on this, so I don't want to pontificate too much. I do think that it is always a journey. Certainly, there's some element of layering these things on together, but it's rare that you would only send snail mail and then they would give online. More often, it's combined with an email, social media approach as well. Marcy says, what about our 80 and 90-plus-year-old donors? Marcy, I can't speak a lot to 90-plus, but certainly in 80-plus, there is a high degree of online behavior still. And so really important to understand that these folks are online. The internet has been a presence in our lives for 30 years. So it means they were working in their 50s when email came out. This group is not, it's important to not sort of overly generalize older donors, because oftentimes we have a mental picture of an old person that was formed when we were kids. And the folks born in the 1910s are not tech savvy, right? They've passed away since then. But if you're like, I'm an older millennial, right? So I grew up looking at my grandparents and thinking these people are not, they're not tech savvy, but they've all passed away sadly, and they would have been about 95 at this point. And so when we think about people that are 10 years younger and 15 years younger in their 80s, that's a big shift. And so let's make sure that we're not being overly biased against older donors there. Whitney says this may be a stupid question. It's not a stupid question, but are there QCDs other than required IRA distributions If yes, what are they? So just breaking this down for a moment. When you turn 70 and a half, you can start giving out of your IRA. When you turn 72, you have what's called a required minimum distribution, which means you have to take money out. And you can give it to charity if you want, but you have to take it out one way or another, and you have to pay taxes on it. You can give up to $100,000, even if your RMD is only $3,000. Why would you do that? Well, you want to be giving out of these pre-tax accounts before you give away post-tax money. So even your 71-year-olds who don't have to take it out this year, it's still better for them to give out of their IRA than to give you cash. So I hope that's clear. Feel free to ask again if it wasn't. What group should get the Stock Monday email? Just previous stock donors, question mark. This is from Kathleen. We actually recommend sending it to everyone. Like, stock ownership is incredibly broad in the United States. It is especially broad among your major donors and your donors generally. So, you know, for many of you, your donors bleed a little bit more educated, bleed a little bit more wealthy, right, compared to non-donors. And so that also is the same group that has more and more stocks. And all of those stocks across the board are appreciating. It would be difficult. You wouldn't regret going too broadly. You will regret going too narrowly. So great question. All right. Direct mail is part of our year-end strategy. Is December 1st too late to drop? We are worried about the USPS imploding. Jill, good question. No, December 1st should be fine. As long as you have clear pathways. It does make sense for these people to have online options as well as, you know, send a check-in. You know, remember how, you know, many of you should do a little check-in to say, you know, how frequently are we writing checks these days compared to other assets, right? So, you know, not all of you are going to know where your checkbook is right now, which, you know, I would have to go track mine down somewhere, but I haven't written a check in a year. And so making sure that even that direct mail has some online giving options, and that direct mail should really have some non-cash giving options as well. Otherwise, you're losing out on tons of funds. So a small note there. Jeannie says, is it okay to use casual language when speaking to donors? There is a difference. You know, I wouldn't say LOL, but speaking like you would to a normal friend, like, you know, think about how you would speak to a coworker who is not your childhood best friend, but also doesn't deserve any sort of like extreme formality. That's the sort of language you want to be using, right? People will feel much less connected to you when you are not a human. And so frequently we see, I think higher ed tends to be sometimes the worst of this, where they just sort of speak with this level of like institutional elegance that makes it seem almost unrelatable. And so making sure that you're speaking in a human-to-human context can be particularly good. Ruth says, do I think QR codes are helpful in a snail mail appeal? I think the jury is out. I think the answer would have been heck no 2 years ago, but the amount of restaurants that have moved into QR codes means that a lot more people know how to use QR codes of all ages, which would not have been true 2 years ago. And so I'd be really curious. You know, one thing I would say is make sure you're tracking it so you know how many visits you're getting off that website, and let us know. I'd be really curious. Happy to be wrong here. I think that there's some value. Heidi says she used QR codes in all of her mailings. It works big time. That's great. Really great information. The thing to remember there is make sure your site is mobile optimized, right? Because nobody goes to a QR code on a desktop. So making sure that you can give online is really key, right? Even working in Apple Pay or other things like that to your websites, super important. So Heath says QR code to our giving page is working a little bit better than normal paper appeal. This is great information, right? And this is so interesting to watch it all happen in real time. So thank you guys, super, super helpful. Oh, good question. So Lauren says, how are you conscious of equity levers around fundraising, specifically around DAFs and tax incentive giving? How do we participate in non-cash gifts without sort of celebrating wealth hoarding? And then she says, parentheses, I know this is oversimplified, which it is. I think this is hard. The balance of especially sort of groups that bleed a little bit more liberal or progressive, always have to balance this idea of like taxes being an overall positive and all these like cool, interesting tax advantage ways to give. And I think you sort of have to wrestle with that on your own. I do think, I see no evidence that charity-based language around different ways to give has any impact on people's assessment of taxes. So let's not overestimate our influence here. But it's a really interesting question, and I think a thoughtful one. And with that, let's pause. We'll give everyone 10 minutes early. Simone just pasted the survey in the chat. If you haven't done that, please just click on it now and take 2 minutes to do it as we finish up. But a really big thank you to everyone for joining. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm sorry that my voice is a little bit below normal, but it's been a joy to spend this time with you. And if you're around in 2 weeks, we'd love to talk to you about legislation and what's likely to happen next year, which we can anticipate will be another wild year. And then if you're a member of the Golden State or have lots of donors in California, feel free to show up tomorrow, and we'll talk through RLTs and what that looks like, which is a really interesting quirk, but a really, really important one for those of you that think about planned giving and are thoughtful around that stuff. So big thank you. See you all in at least 2 weeks, if not sooner, and just delighted to be here with you.